What's up, guys? This is Heis, and today we have a bit of a special treat for you all. I'm hoping that this becomes a recurring series with probably recurring guests called Ridiculous Railways. And I know that we're in America, and we're an American channel, and railroad is the term over here, but I don't think it's fair to call some of these roads. That's right, we're going to be talking about some really crazy stuff today. Specifically, the Mount Tamalpais and Muir Woods Railway, which it just gets mind-boggling, like ridiculous. I can't even speak because of how cursed this is. Joining us today are two friends of the channel who know way more about the Tam than I do, and every little fact that keeps coming up just continues to blow your mind. Please say hello to Spinodo and to Antimatter.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, so Spin, I know that we have been talking about doing this for over a year, probably a year and a half at this point, and it seems that every live stream where Cursed Train whatever comes up, we start talking about crazy train things, out comes the Tam, and there you appear as if summoned. Tell us a little bit about this crazy railroad.
The Mount Tamalpais, originally called the Mill Valley and Mount Tamalpais Scenic Railway, was a railroad started in 1896, completed mid-1896, and ran all the way through till its closure and eventual scrapping in 1930. Started life as a tourist railroad, and that's all it ever was. Just 10 miles north of San Francisco, and they built it up a mountain that really shouldn't have had a railway built up it, and they somehow managed to do it.
I was gonna say, everything he said so far, nothing too out of the ordinary. Early tourist railroad, Bay Area, you've got a population for people there, so why was it a little silly to begin with, I guess?
So, well, that is a very long answer. What made it incredibly wacky was A, its ruling gradient, and some of the curves that they had to build to get this railroad up to the eastern peak of Tamalpais. The track map speaks for itself. This is period track map that is a little bit exaggerated, but it gets more of the point across.
You see San Francisco, and you go around, and it's like, okay, here's the connecting railroad, and it's straight, and then the spaghetti begins. I mean, it looks like somebody's drawn an amoeba or something. The railroad it's just ridiculous. And that's not it about the curves, as we'll get to see.
Here's a more realistic track map for those watching at home. But it was a standard gauge railroad that twisted and wound up the southern side of Mount Tamalpais. And being standard gauge, you would expect fairly broad curves, but this was originally designed to be an electric trolley line that they forgot to buy the electric trolleys for.
Okay.
Not quite forgot, but they wound up using steam engines for the entire lifespan. Shays and Heislers, with a few other little fun engines thrown in. There was an 040 Porter. There was a converted gravity car, steam engine converted gravity car, where they fitted a small Stoddard Dayton vertical marine steam engine with a vertical boiler and ran that.
That's delightful. I knew about the Heislers and the Shays. I didn't know about that. And I knew a little bit about the gravity cars otherwise, but okay. Marine engine built their own little jalopy and ran it up the side of a cliff, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. And some of the curves were incredible, especially for standard gauge.
Right.
The most famous curve on the railroad was Horseshoe Curve, which was at the very end of Blythedale Canyon, and that curve was famously 90 degrees per 100 feet, or a 70-foot radius.
Which is just, I cannot overstate how ridiculous that curve is. 90-degree curve, in degree of curvature being the railroad measurement for curvature. Not saying that it went 90 degrees, it was 90 degrees tight. At 70-foot radius, that means it makes a circle in 140 feet. I mean, that means that you're going around the curve, and if you laid track, you could capture a big boy and just run right around it and barely miss it on either side. You might actually even touch it with loading gauge, but and you're making a complete circle in that space. The sharpest curves that were on the Rio Grande narrow gauge on the main line were 24 degrees. Nowhere near this. The sharpest on their branches were 30 and a little bit above, and that's still not even coming close to this. Uinta Railway's Morro Castle, which we're gonna have to do an episode of this series on the Uinta Railway too. But Morro Castle, with the ridiculous bendy articulated that's trying to kill itself to pull 2 cars up the hill, that's 66 degrees. That's still nowhere near as tight as this. This is ridiculous. It makes sense that it was supposed to be for electric trolleys.
It does, and it was supposed to be a far more wide-reaching system. There were plans to try and get it into the nearby sea town of Bolinas, which was a few miles west of where the railroad ran. Fortunately, it never made it there, but the railroad had lofty goals. Unfortunately, it just never materialized. But the roots in it being an electric trolley railroad that just never converted to electric trolleys and instead ran steam for 34 years makes all the more sense. And here's a photo of Horseshoe Curve to fully understand the lunacy.
I mean, the perspective makes it even hard to process what's going on. I mean, because it looks like it's just straight track further beyond, but yeah, 70-foot radius curve, casual. I mean, just ridiculous.
It keeps getting funnier and crazier. The railroad was truly a marvel of civil engineering. They built it in about 6 months from start to finish.
And how many miles of track is that they built this crooked?
About 8.25 miles.
8.25 miles of track up the side of a mountain, doing this spaghetti in about 6 months. I mean, that's amazing. Yeah.
It is. It was incredibly successful for a very long time. Eventually, the automobile did come and kill it after they built a highway up the mountain. But thankfully, a lot of the railroad's right-of-way still survives as walking trails.
Right.
It did have some pretty famous riders in its heyday, too.
It did. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Susan B. Anthony, John Muir, amongst others. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle even wrote about the railroad at one point. Very much praised how picturesque and beautiful it was.
Like, you gotta think of just how pretty that must have been, being above the Bay Area. And I mean, getting as many different views as you possibly can, because your vantage point is always spiraling around and changing.
Some of the photos from the railroad, here's a photo from, this is an area on the railroad called West Point Inn. This was an inn built during the era of the railroad. It's still a hotel that you can go and walk to. There's no road access, so it's a bit of a hike, but you can still stay there, and the railroad looped all the way around it. I've got a couple incredible photos of West Point specifically that shows the right-of-way approaching to West Point Inn and then coming from West Point Inn, and you can see that grade separation is just astounding.
I mean, you're looking at that picture and you see how low the bottom track is in the center of the frame, and as it goes up you realize it reaches the elevation of the hotel. You made reference to the ruling grade earlier. What was it?
The ruling grade was about 5 to 5.5%, with a maximum gradient of 7%, and it was unbroken for the entire length of the railroad, which enabled the railroad to run these gravity trains.
Right.
Early in the 1900s, they started running gravity trains where they built in their shops some special little just wooden passenger carriages, open top, and they would haul them up the mountain with the Shays and the Heislers, and when the time came, they would, to quote one of the employees at the Mount Tamalpais, switch on the gravity, and they would push the train down the mountain, and a brakeman would control the speed, generally following a steam locomotive so that excessive speeds did not happen.
That is amazing, and what a ride that must have been. I mean, it's a genuine railroad roller coaster at that point. But this picture you've posted of the train arriving at West Point Tavern, you look at the track and it looks like something out of a video game where you're playing in a limited sandbox space and you just slurped as hard as you could to the left. I mean, I can only imagine how, like, and on any curve that you have on the railroad, you have to increase the gauge perpendicular to the rail, right? The gauge measurement to make sure things don't bind up in the curve. It's usually, you know, a 1/4 inch, maybe a 1/2 inch, right? So on our 3-foot gauge rails, 36-inch gauge, in a sharp curve like we have at the museum, we shoot for 36.5. I don't even know, I don't know who would know how much you have to move the track out for this. Like, this is absurd. The picture of the, I can't believe a Shay can run around that.
And just talking about it with a few people, it has blown quite a few people's minds. Like, you know, you read up on Shay locomotives and you hear stories of them going over rough or difficult track, and they would either derail or the axle, you know, or the drive shafts would come apart.
Right.
But somehow the Tamalpais just managed to do it, and they had
they must
quite a
have
good number of
had
Shays.
they must have had long sliding joints on those things, because when those trucks rotate that far out, I mean, that's asking a lot. They must have had a very smart mechanical team, put it that way.
They did. They had a very dedicated team that kept the railroad running, and their equipment was always kept in beautiful condition. They were very proud of it. They often showcased it. A good example of that, here's a photo of Shay number 4 to get an idea of just one of their engines. And as part of the whole display, as being part of a passenger operation, their engines were quite famously very brightly painted. There are color postcards from back in the day painted where they would showcase a lot of the prettier colors, but this is a color painting from one Harlan Heine and Roy Graves. Roy Graves worked on the railroad.
Oh my
and
god.
gave input, and that's how these engines were painted. At least 4 was painted this brightly. That's a planished iron jacket with red cab, red pilot. Incredibly ornate.
Wow.
And it's something I've never seen on a geared engine before.
No. In the photograph that the painting looks like it's based on, you can see how shiny the jacket is. You can see how spotlessly clean the jacket is, which maintaining on any locomotive takes a lot of wiping and obnoxiousness, right? So you can tell the love and care is there. But then, okay, the domes aren't as shiny, and okay, well, maybe they didn't clean everything. No, they are that clean. It's just that they're red. That is fantastic.
And it did expand in its lifetime. The railroad did go further. At one point, they extended the line from the famous double bow knot feature, which was a portion of the railroad that wound back on itself 4 or 5 times in an incredibly small area. And I have a photo of it.
Goodness. Yeah, looking at it on the map, and I mean,
I have a photo of it here. This is the double bow knot. This was a feature where they had to scale a lot of area vertically in a very, very tight space. So they wound back on the track 4 times, and before continuing on up the mountain towards West Point.
I mean, it literally looks like somebody got an HO scale train set with not even 15-inch radius curves. Like, I don't even think that scales up, but like the worst train set curve you've ever seen, and then just decided to lay it haphazardly upon piles of sand in the sandbox. Like, like, I have the photo zoomed in, and you can see the entire U of this curve in this one frame. That's just ridiculous.
And you can see where the track winds back again further on down the mountain through the clouds of smoke. And that was the site of Mesa's station. There was a station there with a water tower that would allow passengers a little bit of rest. Or later on, they could exit there and either take a train back down into Mill Valley or down into the line extension that was built in the early 1900s. That took them down into a place called Redwood Canyon, now known as Muir Woods. So a place you can still visit and is gorgeous. There's towering redwood trees everywhere, and the railroad snaked through it at one point, and it was glorious. And there was a tavern down there as well, a hotel tavern, which I have a photo of here.
With another mind-blowing, ridiculous curve.
Yep.
I mean, just... It just doesn't look real.
It is the ultimate model train set just scaled up over the side of a mountain, and the views, they were back then and they still are absolutely spectacular now. Very picturesque railroad. We're very lucky to have as many photos of it as we do, and there's even video of it on YouTube.
That's right. That's right.
Very successful operation, incredibly safe operation. In their 34 years of operation, there was only one fatal accident on the mountain, and that was when engine number 2, a Heisler, turned over on the side of the mountain after it picked up some grease from the inside of the rails to keep the flanges lubricated. The prior shay that had gone up the mountain deposited a big old glob of grease right on the railhead, and the engine ran away, and the engineer, one Ernest Thomas, was unfortunately killed in the accident. But that was their... But after the accident, the railroad came out with some pretty amazing innovations. One of the more notable ones was, as you could see on the back of this passenger car that I'm posting a photo of here, there's an extra hose there. That was for the flange lubrication system. There was a water injector on the locomotive and on some of the wheel sets that would keep the flanges lubricated, and it was actually run in an edition of Popular Mechanics magazine back in the day.
Huh. So, was it just straight water, or...
Straight water.
I mean, I guess it does work, you know, obviously it doesn't stick around like oil or grease, but, you know, it does work in a pinch as lubrication, and as something that would then not cause a future problem. That's kind of genius.
And it was just one of the many things that they did on the railroad. Unfortunately, the march of time eventually came, and they built a highway up to the tavern on the top. The main attractions for the railroad were, there were taverns and scenic destinations that were part of the railroad's end. I already mentioned there was the tavern down in Muir Woods, which offered fine dining and accommodations. But up at the top of the mountain, there was also an accommodation called the Tavern of Tamalpais, which was one of the fine destinations up at the very top of the mountain. It was expanded after its initial construction in 1896 to bigger and bigger forms as the eras progressed. Fine dining was offered up there, and it was said that the meals up there were incredible and opulent and would have been absolutely worth the day trip over from San Francisco to go and sample. And that was one of the main draws.
The arch over the railway. That's just fun.
Yeah, the arch has a few stories of it catching fire. They were quick to put it out, but
you can see it's a smidge singed.
A smidge singed, yes.
From smoke, of course, as most tunnels and bridges get anyway.
Also, if I could jump back to the curve radius thing, the horseshoe curve in HO scale would be a 9-inch radius.
Oh my god!
It was.
That's for people. If you don't have the immediate train set thing in your head, but you've seen a train set before, the normal train sets that are sold in HO scale are double that. Ridiculous.
And according to a few sources, there were quite a number of curves that were very nearly as tight.
I mean, just looking at the what I want to call whiplash, but not the section where there's 4 or 5 tracks running. I mean, yeah, that's got to be close to the same radius.
It's, yeah, it was said that there were about 20 or 21 curves that were around about a 20-meter radius, or around 70-foot radius.
That is just disgusting.
And then the story of the railroad gets even crazier from there, because this railroad interchanged down in Mill Valley with the North Pacific Coast Railroad, a 3-foot narrow gauge railroad that was very beloved and famous for having their own set of odd and wacky engines and history. Most famously, the North Pacific Coast is famed for creating the North Pacific Coast number 21, which was a 440 cab forward.
Yes, that the cursed thing that many have heard of, thanks to Thomas the Tank Engine of all things. I still can't believe that they added that in. And then, of course, from other fame as well, just being a wacky locomotive. I personally think that the North Pacific Coast is coolest for having the gigantic drivered 10-wheelers on 3-foot gauge and running commuter trains at like ludicrous speed on the narrow gauge. But you're telling me that there's a bit of the TAM that is dual gauge.
There's a bit of a TAM that is dual gauge, and the story gets even funnier because the master mechanic of the Tamalpais was at one point Bill Thomas, who is the one who created number 21. Oh my God. The cab forward.
That just makes too much sense. That brain, only a brain of that specialty could come up with both of these things.
But that's the story of the Mount Tamalpais and Muirwood Scenic Railroad. Early on, railroad found great success, expanded, but never got as far as they wished they had. The line to Bolinas, even though it was stated in several newspapers that it had at one point started, never saw completion, and the advent of the automobile unfortunately came and ended the time of the TAM. But thankfully, one locomotive from the railroad does survive, the number 9, and quick shout out to the friends of the number 9. They are doing a wonderful, beautiful job restoring that locomotive to its, as it appeared on the Tamalpais, condition.
You'll love to hear it. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Thank you for telling the story and the details, both Spinotto and Antimatter. And thank you all for watching, and let us know what you thought about the video down in the comments below. Goodness gracious, this railroad is just... The little details, okay, a tight curve, whatever. No, just look at the pictures. I mean, it's ridiculous. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the TAM, there's a couple more ways that you can.
Couple books. The first one is The Crookedest Railroad in the World by T.G. Worm and A.C. Graves. Absolutely fantastic book. Covers the founding of the railroad and the incredible story that led to its creation, including a lawsuit and armed conflict.
The casual armed conflict as you're building your railroad, of course, yeah.
Yep, armed conflict, and shout out to Fred Runner's book, Images of the Mount Tamalpais Scenic Railway. A lot of excellent photos and further details on the railroad. Very well worth checking out if you wish to learn more about this crazy, incredible railroad.
For sure. And the links to those will be down in the description below. We hope you guys enjoyed this, hope you learned something, and if you want this turned into a series, let us know. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch y'all next time.